In northern Italy, there is a lake called Resia. At first glance, it seems peaceful, still, serene. But look closer. Beneath these waters lies an entire village, houses, walls, streets, all buried when a dam was built in 1950. But one thing refused to disappear: the church steeple.
The church steeple, still standing after 70 years, half buried, half defiant. That steeple became more than a landmark. It became a memorial, a silent witness to what once was, and what still endures.
Just like that steeple, God calls us to build our own memorials of grace, reminders of His faithfulness that stand through time, through storms, through generations. Because one day someone will ask, what do these stones mean to you? And your story, your testimony, your chronicle might just lead them across their own Jordan. Hi there, it's Q4E3, and today we explore the topic Memorial of Grace. You ready? Let's get into it.
First, the key highlights. What to expect. 1. Consecration. There is a preparation preceding accessing His presence and the privileges therein. If the Lord must fight on our side, then we must intentionally clean up and align. 2. Unseen sacrifices matter. Like the priests who stood in the Jordan, true service often happens in silence and endurance. 3. Memorials preserve faith. The stones at Gilgal weren't decoration. They were reminders for every generation to trust God. Fourth, God's grace knows no bias. God's contention is with sin and its originator, not people. No one is beyond saving.
The waiting was finally over. About 40 years earlier, they had tried the same mission and failed. The difference? God neither approved nor led the mission then, because they believed a lie and they rebelled, as we find in Numbers 14 from verse 41 to 44. This time was different though. God was leading the mission. After 40 long years of wandering, Israel stood again on the edge of promise. This time, the Jordan River rushed before them, its waters swollen, overflowing its banks. Behind them lay decades of delay, rebellion, and grace in the wilderness. Ahead of them, destiny.
But here's the tension. This was no calm stream. It was flood season. Humanly speaking, crossing was impossible. No bridges, no boats, just a roaring torrent between them and the land God had promised.
So, after all that waiting, was this the moment it would all collapse?
So it seemed, but not really. It was a test of faith. Instructed by the Lord, Joshua gave the command, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests carrying it, then you shall set out and follow it." However, as we have established in our previous series, there is always a preparation preceding accessing His presence and the privileges therein. The people were required to first consecrate themselves before following the ark.
Consecrate themselves? What exactly does that mean, and why was it necessary? Besides, why the Ark? Couldn't they just march across like any other army?
Let's begin with your second question. This was not just about crossing a river, it was about acknowledging who was really in charge. Israel's success will never come from human strategy or strength alone. Victory always began with God going first.
To your first question, consecration was a purification process, similar to what priests had to do before beginning their service in the sanctuary. Exodus 28:41, 29:1, and similar to what Israel did before God revealed himself on Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:10-14. It meant laying aside sin, removing impurity, intentionally choosing holiness before stepping into God's presence.
On a generic note, what God is opposed to is sin, not people. That's why his contention with the Canaanites was not about race or nationality. It was their sin that kept them in rebellion. Genesis 15, verse 16. And because they refused to let go of those sins, they found themselves in direct opposition to God. So, if Israel was going to walk with God into battle, they had to first separate themselves from the very thing God was fighting against. Deuteronomy 20, from verse 16 to 18. That's a no brainer.
This is not an isolated principle. The principle of consecration runs through Scripture. For instance, in Numbers 11:18 we read, "Say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, Oh, that someone would give us meat to eat. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat."
Also, in Deuteronomy 23, verse 14, we read, Since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to defeat your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be holy. He must not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. Point is, this is a generic principle. It is one of our terms of engagement with God. There is a preparation preceding accessing His presence and the privileges therein. Remember this. If the Lord must fight on our side, then we must intentionally clean up and align. Before God can fight for Israel in battle, they must show their allegiance and trust in Him as their commander. And so we too must.
This will be Joshua's first public outing as Moses' successor. Everything was at stake. However, the Lord would use this opportunity to validate his calling. Joshua 6:7 puts it this way, Now the Lord said to Joshua, This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. This will be the second time we're hearing God go an extra mile to validate his appointed leader to his people. First it was Moses, now it's Joshua.
Done once, we might argue it's a coincidence. But twice, that's definitely not a coincidence, right?
Right, that is correct. God was making a statement. It must be that it is important to God that we acknowledge and respect the leaders He has appointed over us, even if they are not flawless and may make mistakes. This is as relevant today as it was then. Remember this.
But there's more. This miracle wasn't just about getting across a river, it was about building faith for the battles ahead. God was reassuring them. He who could secure a dry passage through the Jordan could also grant them the gift of the land as promised. This was the faith boost they needed. If God could silence a roaring river, he could silence every enemy waiting on the other side. So this was more than physics. It was a promise in action.
Exactly. This crossing 2.0 was a bold defiance of natural law. A reminder that the God of creation is neither constrained nor limited by his creation. In plain English, it is neither too hard nor too late for the Lord to fix. Jesus put it this way: the things which are impossible with men are possible with God. Luke 18, verse 27. This had always been true, but now it was their lived experience, and they believed it.
Have you ever listened to scientists trying so hard to explain away a miracle and failing so badly? Well, God made sure there will be no room for that. To make it clear this is no coincidence, God chose His timing carefully. The Jordan was at flood stage, verse 15. Humanly impossible. Yet the moment the priests carrying the ark set foot in the river, the waters stopped flowing and piled up in a heap far away at a town called Adam. And right there, opposite Jericho, over 1 million people, young and old, walked across on dry ground. Not soggy mud, not knee-deep sludge, dry ground.
And the priests?
Yeah, they stood right in the middle of the Jordan, holding their ground until every last Israelite had crossed. God's presence stood firm while his people passed through. But that was not the end. After the crossing, Joshua gave an unusual command. He selected 12 men, one from each tribe, and he sent them back into the middle of the riverbed, right where the priests had planted their feet. Now, each man was to carry out a stone. Stone, not a fish, not treasure, stones.
Wait a minute. Stones? I don't understand. They left the croaker and salmon fishes and picked up stones instead. There's got to be more to this.
Good catch, Casey. We find clues in Joshua 4, 6-8. It reads, "Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall say to them, 'Because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, so these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever.'" He reiterated same principle in verses 21 to 24.
These stones were not random souvenirs. They were silent sermons, tangible reminders that the God who stopped the Jordan is the God who goes with his people into every battle. Stones that speak not about what Israel achieved, but about what God accomplished. And every time a child would ask, what do these stones mean? Faith will find fresh fuel for a new generation.
Here are a few practical takeaways from this. 1. First, imagine the hours it must have taken for an entire nation to cross the Jordan. Families, children, elderly, livestock, all while the priests stood rooted in the middle, carrying the ark. Even if the ark itself wasn't heavy, the weight of obedience, the endurance required, the sacrifice, it was immense.
And yet, whenever this story is told, we rarely hear about them. The priests who quietly carried the burden in obedience, so others could cross.
Exactly. Their sacrifice reminds me of the spouses of our ministers and leaders who hold it together in the home front, the likes of Sister Jessica Perea and the quiet support workers in God's house today, the ones who stand by while others move forward, who come first and leave last. They make sure the church is clean, they serve the meals, they take care of the kids, the likes of Sister Dell, Brother Randy in Baltimore Whitemarsh, the likes of Brother Tolu and Sister Tariro in Edinburgh SDA Church, the likes of Elder Kwa and Sister Oluchi in Valenside SDA Church, and so many more. People whose names may not make the headlines, but whose obedience and service hold the line for everyone else. To each of you, we say thank you.
Second, there was the need to keep this miracle of the Lord in the collective memory of his people perpetually. Those 12 stones mattered. They weren't just souvenirs from a miracle. They were tangible, undeniable evidence of God's intervention. A memorial designed to spark questions. What do these stones mean?
But here is the key: each new generation had to do more than just see stones. They had to internalize their meaning. They had to own the story for themselves. Because faith is never inherited, it must be embraced personally. Think about this. Moses left Israel, documented evidence of God's power in the inspired writings of Genesis and Job. Joshua left them 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, set up at Gilgal, a memorial of God's deliverance.
Which begs the question, what are we handing down to the next generation?
Imagine if your family had a tradition of logging God's miracles, a journal passed down through the generations, a record of God's faithfulness written not just in scripture, but in your own family line. How will that impact your faith today?
Better yet, imagine if you had to prepare your own chronicle, a record of your walk with God, every answered prayer, every miracle, every testimony. What kind of inheritance of faith would your children receive? That's what the stones were meant to do, to spark questions, to keep memory alive, to make faith personal for every new generation.
So, if you have not started yet, today is a good day to begin. Leave behind more than memories, leave behind memorials of God's faithfulness, because one day your children may ask, what do these stones mean to you? And your story may be the spark that ignites faith in them. Remember this.
Moving on, have you noticed the striking parallels between Jesus' earthly ministry and the experience of ancient Israel?
You mean Jesus' earthly ministry as the representative of Israel follows the pattern of the history of ancient Israel?
That is correct. His entire ministry mirrored Israel's journey, but where they failed, he triumphed. For instance, both were called out of Egypt, to find in Exodus 24, Hosea 11, Matthew 2. Both are referred to as God's firstborn, my servant, the seed of Abraham, the vine, as we find in Psalms 80, verse 8, and John 15, verse 1.
Israel was baptized in the Red Sea figuratively, 1 Corinthians 10. 2. Jesus was baptized in the Jordan literally, Matthew 3:13f. After their baptism, Israel wandered 40 years in the wilderness. After his baptism, Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness. And here is the good part. What Israel couldn't accomplish as a nation, Jesus accomplished as their representative and ours too. See Daniel 9:24. Hebrews 3-4 recognizes the symbolic significance of the crossing of the Jordan and presents the entrance into Canaan as foreshadowing the rest of grace that Christians enter through faith.
Just as the Lord fulfilled his promise to bring Israel through the Jordan into the earthly Canaan, we too can rest assured he will keep his promise to bring us safely into the heavenly one. The same God who held back the waters still holds back the storms in our lives today. His promises have not aged, his faithfulness has not faded. Remember this.
So this journey isn't just about history. It's a rehearsal for destiny.
Exactly. Every miracle in Scripture points us forward. The Red Sea, the Jordan, the stones of remembrance all whisper the same truth. If God could bring them through, He can bring you through too. And soon, the last river will part, the final crossing will come, and those who trusted His word will step, not into Canaan's plains, but into heaven's gates.
Until then, let's keep building our memorials of grace, because every act of faith today is a stone laid on the path to eternity.
And that's a wrap for this week. Next week, we explore the topic, the conflict behind all conflicts. Till then, I remain your Sabbath school doodling out, still making it make sense, one study at a time.
If this message stirred even a whisper in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs a faith boost. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when we publish the next episode. But before you go, if you haven't yet made that life-changing decision to follow Christ, the invitation is still open. Don't wait. The clock is ticking, and grace is calling. Remember, we weren't born just to survive and pay bills. You were created to reign with Him. So keep the faith. Stay the course. No retreat, no surrender.